RX 6700 XT in 2026. My name is Beezito, and today we're going to be having a look at this card in 13 games, and hopefully in a long-running series that I can do for 2026 on the remaining graphics cards that I have. So this is going to be the first of many. The 13 games are going to comprise of 8 games of a standard lineup and 5 games that will be of 2026 games. Most of them will be AAA and a few eSport titles. The main thing for this graphics card is that it has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Now unfortunately for these tests I will not be including how much VRAM it is using, but we will go over the performance numbers in terms of average FPS for the average and the 1% low's average FPS, and we'll compare it between 1080p and 1440p. We have some pretty simple testing, and in the future I would love to do some ones on FSR where performance wasn't showing as well. So let's head on to our sponsor, Keysfan.com, for cheaper Windows keys.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Keysfan.com, for cheaper Windows and Office license keys. Keysfan.com are offering 52% off Microsoft Windows licenses using code BEZ52 for Windows 11 Pro, Home, LTSC, LTSC Enterprise, IoT, Windows 10 if you'd like, and you'll be getting 52% off. Just because we've been working for a while together as well, they're also offering 66% off Microsoft Office licenses as well. As we can see, if you use code BEZ66, you'll get 66% off an Office license. They also offer Microsoft Office and Windows license bundles using code BEZ66. It's great to see that they're continuing on to work with me, and I'm happy to say that they are consistently pretty solid. So let's go ahead and see how it works. So we're going to go ahead and click buy now on the Windows 11 Pro key. I'm going to add it to cart. I'm going to view cart. Then we're going to go ahead and apply our discount code. This one is BEZ52. I'm going to go ahead and apply the discount. Then we're going to proceed to checkout, fill out our information. We're going to press place order. And as you can see here, they offer multiple payment methods. So they include PayPal, credit card, and obviously the best way to go here is probably PayPal. So we're going to use that method as it's the most secure. Keysfan.com offer pretty solid customer service, and I've tested them multiple times in the past. So if you guys want to get a cheap Windows key, head over to Keysfan.com and use code BEZ52 for 52% off Windows operating system licenses and code BEZ66 for 66% off Office licenses. I'll see you guys there at Keysfan.com. For our system specs, we'll have the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, and on top of that, we'll have the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 on it. For our GPU, of course, we have the RX 6700 XT. Our one is from ASUS, and it's the dual Radeon one that has 12 gigabytes of GDDR6. I'll have some of the extra specs on screen if you guys want to have a look there as well. For our RAM, we have 32 gigabytes of G-Skill DDR5 6000 CL30. Our motherboard is the ASRock X870 Tai Chi Lite with rebar enabled. For this GPU, we'll be using Windows 11 and the latest AMD drivers. Now in terms of testing, all games are tested on a 3-run average in full screen. The GPU is stock, and whatever stock overclock it comes with will be represented, and the performance VSync is off. The frame rate is uncapped. Unfortunately for this test, we won't be doing any ray trace testing, so RT is off. FSR has been turned off for this test, so we won't have any upscaling. It will be all native resolution, usually using something like TAA. And if it's something that you guys want to see in terms of upscaling for FSR, I'm happy to do that for another video later on. I have not done any VRAM usage testing as well, so if you guys want to see that in a future video, I'm happy to do VRAM and FSR as a test comparison in the future. Let me know in the comments. Let's head on to our first game. For our first games, there will be 8 of them. That will be our standard lineup, and then we'll have 5 games after after that for our 2026 games. Starting us off, we have Alan Wake at medium settings with FSR native. Average FPS fell from 59 at 1080p to 39 at 1440p, a 34% reduction. The 1% follows a slightly smaller decline, dropping from 45 to 32 FPS, or a reduction of 29%. Our next game is the Black Myth Wukong benchmark tool, and at 1080p, we find that our FPS was 49 for average FPS, and this reduced to 35 at 1440p. For our 1% lows, we find a similar pattern once again, going from 42 FPS to 30, a 29% decrease. Counter-Strike 2 is one of our esport titles at medium preset, and we find that our average FPS dropped from 576 to 429 at 1440p, a 26% reduction in performance. Our 1% lows saw a slightly larger decline of 28%, but overall still more than playable, and of course this is just one of those games that we have to leave in because it is a pretty constant esport throughout the years. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077 at high settings. We find that our average FPS fell from 81 at 1080p to 56 at 1440p, a 31% reduction, and our 1% lows followed a similar pattern, going from 55 to 38 from 1080p to 1440p, also a 31% reduction. The game did feel more than playable though, although at 1440p we can see that it's starting to reach the limit of what it's able to perform at least providing a minimum of 60 FPS. Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered is up next at very high settings with TAA, so it's one of the few games here in the constant lineup that has very high settings, and we saw a average FPS of 100 at 1080p and 77 at 1440p. Our 1% lows followed a similar trend with a 23% reduction in performance, although it did feel very smooth in either 1440p or 1080p, so not really too many problems with this title. Next up is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Now we're using the opening scene, or well, the second opening scene with the horses at high settings with SMAA 2TX. Our average FPS decreased from 93 at 1080p to 64 at 1440p, a 31% reduction in performance. The 1% lows were a bit more heavily affected, going from 79 to 41 FPS. That's a huge 48% decrease. Now I'm interested to see why this is such a large decrease compared to some of the other games on the 1% lows, although the 1080p to 1440p does follow pretty much everyone else's around 20 to 30% reduction in performance. I'm not sure what's happening here with this title. Next up we have Marvel Rivals, our second esport title. We're using the low preset here with TAAU 100, and now I do know that is not the most realistic settings for this game, as you're usually trying to max out what type of FPS you're getting, and a lot of people will use different upscaling, but we did find on these settings that we average 104 FPS at 1080p and 69 at 1440p. Our 1% lows weren't too much better, to be honest, either, going from 83 at 1080p to 56 at 1440p. We can see that this game does push the RX 6700 XT a little bit, and although it does have 12GB of VRAM, it's just not fast enough to keep up, at least with these settings and using the TAAU with 100%. There are definitely other settings that you can use that should work fine with the 6700 XT. The last game is The Last of Us Part 1, and last but not least, we're using it on the high preset. I saw an average FPS fall from 103 at 1080p to 69 at 1440p, a 33% reduction, and our 1% lows held up okay, going from 89 to 61, which is a 31% decrease, so in line with what we saw from the other 8 games. For our 8 game average, we can see that the RX 6700 XT for the total average FPS reduced in performance by around about 28%, and the 1% lows dropped around about 30%. So as we can see, we have the total FPSs on here, so we went from 146 to 105 on average FPS, and 105 to 73 at going from 1080p to 1440p. Our next 5 games will be 2026 titles, and starting us off, we have Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag Resync. So this game just came out, and as we can see, resynced on the high preset with TAA native AA, the average FPS fell from 65 at 1080p to 1440p's 49, a 25% reduction in performance. The 1% lows held up slightly better, going from 47 to 38, from 1080p to 1440p, a reduction of just 19% compared to that 25 on the average FPS. Pretty happy with how this performs in such a beautiful game, especially with the high preset, and with no frame generation or FSR upscaling. Our next game is Forza Horizon 6, and as we can see here at high settings with TAA 1.0 and short motion blur, we saw the average FPS go from 112 at 1080p to 87 at 1440p, a 22% reduction in performance. The 1% lows followed a pretty similar pattern, going from 99 to 77 FPS, a 22% decrease as well. Forza Horizon 6 is a pretty well optimized game from what I've tested on about 3 or 4 cards at this point, and it's not as hard to run as some of the other games that have recently come out. Onimusha Way of the Sword demo is a demo game for hopefully I think what will come out this year, and at medium settings we have it at TAA 100. The average FPS dropped from 99 at 1080p to 69 at 1440p, a 30% reduction. The 1% lows saw a slightly larger decline, going from 84 FPS to 58 FPS, or a 31% reduction, pretty similar to 1080p. This game was pretty interesting to play, but I had just played the opening scene right up until you get to the door opening, so not too much, but it does look like a good game to benchmark for the future. The next game we have up is PRAGMATA, and the scene that we're using is when you drop down and there's all those scary robot baby monsters. I don't know how to describe them. You'll see it in the top left hand corner of the screen, but we're using the balance preset with TAA. PRAGMATA averaged a 91 FPS average at 1080p compared to 63 at 1440p, a 31% reduction, pretty similar to what we've seen in other games, and the 1% lows held up slightly better, but not too much, decreasing from 73 to 52, or 29% reduction. Happy to say that either way, I think you're good to go for PRAGMATA from what I played on the RX 6700 XT. It felt pretty smooth, and honestly this game doesn't have to have the highest frame rate. Last but not least, we have Resident Evil Requiem. At high settings with TAA native, Resident Evil Requiem saw an average FPS fall from 105 at 1080p to 70 at 1440p. The 1% lows FPS went from 78 to 54 on 1440p, or a 31% reduction. Now we did use the opening scene basically to where we get to the kitchen in Resident Evil Requiem. So for these 5 games in 2026, how does it perform? And yeah, it's actually not too bad. As you can see, on 1080p we achieved an average FPS of 94, and this reduced by 28% to 68 FPS on 1440p. The 1% lows saw a pretty similar trend, going from 76 on 1080p to 56 on 1440p, a reduction in performance of 26%. But as you can see, at 1080p it's definitely still quite a strong card, considering that the graphics settings on a lot of these games were actually on the high or medium settings. Although they aren't the most demanding games that you could play, I can definitely say for these 2026 games, I think you're going to have a good time. On 1440p, of course this is just a 60 FPS card, and you know, it is just basically entry level on 1440p, but yeah, you will have a pretty decent experience overall. I didn't really see too many issues, and I will need to follow up this video with VRAM usage overall, because it does have 12 gigabytes, which does give it an advantage, but at the same time it's not the fastest card. So overall, for our 13 game average for our 8 game lineup and our 2026 5 games, we find that the average FPS went from 126 at 1080p to 1440p's 91. This is a reduction of 28% in performance. Our 1% lows went from 94 to 66 at 1440p, a reduction of 29%. So yeah, pretty similar between the two in terms of reduction in performance of 1% lows or average FPS. But yeah, pretty happy to say either way you're gonna get away pretty well on these lineups of titles. Specifically those 2026 games played pretty well, so I think the other 8 games kind of brought up the average FPS score a little little bit, but that's why we do a range of games to hopefully try and nail down what this card actually looks like in 2026. That sums up performance. Let's have a look at the average price and the FPS per dollar now. For the 6700 XT pricing, what I've done here is we've included the eBay 5 cheapest listings that I could find. Then we have Trade Me, which is the New Zealand equivalent to eBay, and unfortunately I could only find the 2 cheapest listings. And we have the MSRP price from 2021, and all of these prices are in US dollar and they exclude shipping and VAT or GST, so kind of like an excise tax, I believe is what you call it. So as you can see, New Zealand has the cheapest card just based on 2 listings, so 273 US dollars compared to 298 on eBay, and of course that's a reduction from the 479 of the MSRP, so I'm pretty happy that it is a reduction. It should be. And I think the most important graph going forward off this is actually the FPS per dollar. As we can see here, our FPS per dollar, it's the highest on the Trade Me listing, as that was the cheapest at 1080p, so we get 46 cents per a FPS. And next is eBay at 1080p. That goes for both the 1% lows and the average FPS, and it kind of just scales down from there to 1440p, and then the MSRP ones being last right there. So yeah, pretty interesting statistic that I just wanted to provide as well, and it gives some insight into different countries compared to each other. So what are my final thoughts?
What are my final thoughts? The RX 6700 XT is definitely a capable card in 2026. In 9 out of the 13 games, we did find that it actually averaged at least 60 FPS at 1440p without any upscaling. So I think that's quite impressive for a card that is a little bit older, but it could go to show that the 12GB of VRAM does help, despite it being slightly slower than something like the RTX 3070. That's the next card that I will be benchmarking for the 2026 results. I think overall it's a pretty good buy as well, considering for around about $273 US as well, you can get it. So, it really depends on your region and how much an RTX 3070 costs and how much a RX 6700 XT costs, but I think you're going to get good value for money by purchasing a 6700 XT, especially in games where you will need more VRAM. Now, of course, going on that, in heavier titles like Alan Wake 2, as we saw, and Black Myth Wukong, we did see a bit of a performance hit, unfortunately, but that goes to show those games are very difficult to run. But I think it held up well, especially with no FSR upscaling. Going on that, a major flaw for these tests, and what I didn't get around to, is actually FSR upscaling testing for the 6700 XT. While I do think it's important to test at native resolution or the quality being at 100 on something like TAA, I do think, especially for second-hand cards, that upscaling should be tested. And especially at 1440p, I think that is something that I will do in the future. So please let me know in the comments if that's something you guys would like to see additionally alongside the native results, because I think that better represents the actual performance that you're probably going to use in real life with this card. Now, if this was a day 1 release of the card, of course, we'd probably be leaning more towards just the native resolution testing, but since it is 2026 and it's a second-hand card, I think it's more than fair to say that upscaling should be a benchmark as well. On top of that, I didn't do any ray trace testing. I don't think that's actually that relevant at this price range, but if it is something that you guys want to see, just let me know in the comments as well. Yes, but the RX 6700 XT is a great buy in 2026, depending on how much you can get it for. Now, I don't have any data to compare this to because I haven't done the series with another card, but the competitor card is the RTX 3070, and it's something that will be tested in my next video on this benchmarking series. It's about time we get through all of these cards and get it done. So I'll see you guys in the next video, which will be the RTX 3070 in 2026 video. But other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Let me know if you guys want more videos like this for the future. Check out keysfan.com /sheepo Windows keys, wistek.org for some more awesome content. And I'm just listing off stuff now. I'm not even sure if you guys are watching, but stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!